Alright, so the first 10 videos you would have seen on the work on this bike were from February to May of this year. And from May to August, I was really struggling to get it running right. And so I went dark online. In fact, it got so dark that I made a post on Vintage Honda Twins asking for help from some of the people online. I think the best way to outline the struggles I was having with getting this bike to run is just to read my post on Vintage Honda Twins. So here goes. Hello all. I'm having trouble with my 1969 CL450. I'll quickly walk you through the last couple months. Bought the bike in February. It was running well enough for the owner to drive it to my place, as I did not yet have my license. He claimed it ran fine, but would need some work to pass inspection. From February to May, I worked on it without running it. Went through the electrics, everything works, new brake pads, clutch plates, chain and sprockets, tires, etc. Went through the carbs as per the CMC video. Replaced one jet because the head was so stripped I didn't want to put it back in as is. All other jets are as I found them. Set the valve clearances and tensioned cam chain as per CMC video. After that, I go ahead and start the bike. I realized the new throttle cable the previous owner gave me was the wrong part and too short. It held the carbs open. So I bought a new old stock cable, and now it works great. Throttle snaps fully shut on both, and there are no hang-ups. Then I started again. It dies without any throttle, and dies with full throttle. I have to hold it around 1/3 to half open to keep it going. Choke on a little to start, and then off. The tack was broken at this point, so I don't know where it was idling. I take the carbs off, lower the floats to 20 millimeters as per the manual, because CMC Common Motor Collective had slightly different advice. I throw the carbs back on, start it up again. It idles decent without choke, revs up with throttle, but won't die back down after it revs up. Also hearing some backfiring and popping. So I take out the spark advancer and points, clean up and re-grease the advancer, set ignition timing, and fix the tachometer. I just started it up today. This is May 31st. No more popping or backfiring, so I think the timing is good. Full choke, it will start, but struggles and dies. 95% choke, it will idle at 2,000 RPM. No choke, it idles at 6,000. So I leave it at 95% choke and run it for a few minutes. When I'm sitting on it and holding it upright, it floats around 2,000. When I put it on the kickstand and lean it, it goes down to maybe 1,500. If I give it gas, it will rev up to maybe 3,000 or 4,000. And then if I take it away, it will drop to 1,000 to 1,500 and take a minute to get back up to 2,000. At idle, it bounces around in RPM and in sound, just sitting there, maybe from 1,500 to 2,500. The next easy fix I'm gonna try is the carb boots. Also, my petcock is a little finicky. Would that have any effect on this? Any ideas would be greatly appreciated. This is my first mechanical project. My background is in carpentry. Thank you. Now, I ended that post looking for ideas, and I never revisited that forum. Instead, I kept looking around impatiently online at anything that could be the issue, and I really struggled to figure out what was going wrong. So, I'm just editing the video now and wanted to film a few clips as kind of footnotes. The first of which is that one problem I had and forgot to mention was that my idle mixture screw had broken off inside of my right carb. And because the hole there for the idle mixture screw is actually a tapered fit to match the taper of the screw, I ended up having to buy a new carb body. So this is actually the old one. And luckily I was able to pretty much switch out all the jets. One thing to note though is that I did initially buy the wrong carb body because there were two types of carbs that came with the 450s. I needed a 14H, and initially I bought I think it's like a 723B or something like that. Another footnote is that in trying to hunt down my idle issue, I ended up doing two things with the throttle shaft and the throttle plate. So I'll just demonstrate on this carb. This is the throttle shaft, and it is opened when you pull the cable up. So I ended up doing some work realigning this plate so that it fully sealed off the gap here. And then actually, and I've heard mixed things, and I sort of think at this point that maybe these throttle shaft seals don't do anything. I certainly noticed absolutely no difference when I added them, but I did end up buying new throttle shaft felt seals and replacing them because I was hunting down an air leak. Basically, the symptoms I was describing, I discovered most likely meant an air leak, and probably also an adjustment screw out of adjustment. On one of these days when I'm messing around with the bike trying to get it to run right, I jostle the tank and I puncture the crossover tube underneath the gas tank, and I'm leaking gas everywhere. So I drain the tank and I go down to a local vintage bike hobbyist garage and I ask if any of them have some fuel line. They didn't have any fuel line, but I did talk with them for a couple hours, and we arranged for me to come back down to the garage in the future and show them the bike and let them see if they could get it running right. So about a month later, we finally schedule a day, and I get down there with the bike, and we discover two important things that were preventing this from running right. So let me show you those. The first issue is embarrassingly obvious, and it's that this screw, literally the idle speed screw, was way out of adjustment. So when the guys at the garage back these screws out a little bit, immediately it's at least able to idle without choke around, 1/2000 where it's supposed to be. But it's still really inconsistent. Now, the second and much less obvious issue that makes me feel much better about all the trouble I had with this bike is right here. This is not stock on the engine. This is a modification that a previous owner did to the bike. They're on both sides, and they're these little 5mm brass ports on the intake manifold. Another footnote here, I actually forgot to mention what these ports were added for. They're for vacuum sinking the carbs. So a lot of bikes with multiple carbs will actually have already ports in each carburetor, so you can set up one of these vacuum gauges and figure out how much vacuum each cylinder is drawing. The 450s don't come with vacuum ports stock, and reading around on some forums tells me that it's a fairly common mod to add them so you get a cleaner sync between your carbs. Now, when I discovered these ports, they had little black caps on them like these, but this cap had actually been split open. And my guess here is that at one point when I went to check the oil, I pulled this up and I grabbed on this and maybe split this open. But regardless, this was open and was effectively just a big air leak into the engine. And that was causing all these inconsistent idle issues. So I ended up finding these nice vacuum caps. These are just called like thick rubber vacuum cap on Amazon. And they fit over really nice, and I threw a zip tie on there. Once those were sealed, I no longer had any air leak, so I could actually get the idle adjusted using the mixture screw and the speed screw pretty well. So, just to give you a really brief summary of how the manual says to sync and set these carbs. What you want to do is run the bike, get it warm, and then use this idle mixture screw. This is what meters how much fuel enters through the idle circuit. You want to arrange this screw so that it is idling as high as it will. There will be a point where you'll turn it, it'll idle higher, and then if you keep turning it, it'll drop again. You want to bring it to the highest point, and then you want to back off this screw until you're idling at 1200 to I think 1,500 RPM. And you want to do that at both carbs at the same time. And after both of those screws are set and you're idling at 1200, you want to come up here and you have these two ends of the throttle cable, and you want to make sure that both throttle butterflies are opening in sync. A lot of videos I found online emphasize this throttle sync as syncing the carbs, but they did not talk a lot about these two screws and what exactly you should do to them as per the manual. So there you have it. The bike runs pretty well. I put about 500 miles on it since I went down to that garage in August, and I'm having a blast. Taking it to school every day. I'm going on longer road trips when I can. It's a lot of fun. So in the last part of this video, I just wanted to talk about the value of this project and sort of my takeaways from it. So the first thing has to do with actually working on the bike and kind of my advice. And it has to do with my emphasis on as per the manual, especially when it comes to these carbs, but probably it goes for a lot of this bike. I think something I didn't realize when I got into this project was how much the design philosophy of manufacturers has changed in the last 50 or 60 years. These older bikes are pretty simple machines, but they also wear a lot more and a lot faster than some of the newer stuff. And so it wasn't an unrealistic expectation of manufacturers that the owner would be doing a lot of the maintenance work themselves. Now, because of this, the manual outlines almost any procedure that you'll have to do on this bike, even if you're restoring it on as large a scale as 55 years later. Now, I'm a younger person. I've spent a lot of time on YouTube. You're on YouTube right now, so it was kind of my instinct to look for people online who had advice from personal experience working on the bike. And don't get me wrong, I got a lot of really helpful advice from those people. But I really do think that those resources, especially for a hobbyist or a starting mechanic, those resources should be secondary to the manual, because the manual is really going to tell you, for the most part, pretty precisely what you have to do and in what order to fix the problem you're having. Now, there will be all kinds of external problems. That little mod on my engine, for example, the manual was never going to cover that, and you kind of have to use your own understanding of engines and the bike and the community or whatever to solve some of those problems. That being said, I wasn't reaching for the manual before I was going onto forums or YouTube, and I really think in my next project I'm going to go manual first and then find some supplementary resources with other things, because these manuals can be really comprehensive. The last piece of advice I have is less about working on the bike and more about riding and maintaining it, and it is not to aim for perfection. When you think about a modern engine, it's using a CPU and countless sensors to measure exactly all these environmental and internal factors, and then it's depositing the perfect amount of fuel and air into your engine so that it sounds consistent no matter what's happening or where you are. On a carbureted bike, you are being asked to be that computer, and the environment is constantly changing, and you're not down there with a screwdriver changing your screws and whatnot. All this is to say is that in the last few months, the average temperature's gone down 10, 15 degrees. My bike sounds a little different now. That literally has to do with the density of the air because it is colder. It's sucking in more air. It's kind of a leaner condition. Now, I've done some tweaking to try to fix this, but the point of saying this is that day to day, the bike might not sound absolutely perfect. And what I've learned, commuting to school every day and doing my longer trips, is that if the bike is running well enough to put miles on it, you should put miles on it. And if you're worried about a little fluctuation in the idle or a clicking or a misfire that you're hearing, and you think it's a major problem, save it for the winter. One of the best things about the hobby, now that I'm almost a year into it, is that anyone else who's interested in it is automatically willing and very happy to talk to you about it. This is true for a lot of hobbies, but there's something special about this vintage bike maintenance thing. Basically, and I feel confident saying this from personal experience, if you see anyone in any context working on a vintage bike, and you yourself work on vintage bikes, that is automatic permission to talk, and you will likely be talking for an hour or more. Now, in terms of personally moving forward, this is not the last video you'll see on this bike. I already have a video filmed and edited on replacing the brake and shifter pedals. On top of that, I do need to fix the electric start. There are a few things wrong. And who knows? Anything could happen to this engine. I'm having some weird transmission issues every once in a while, so maybe there'll be a winter project where I go through it. That being said, I had so much fun on this project, and I'm loving riding it so much that I've decided I want to try to take on another project, something smaller, something more capable of off-road. I'm looking into some Honda trails. That would be awesome. So I'm definitely going to have more bike maintenance videos on this channel because it's really a lot of fun, and it's such a satisfying and engaging way to learn. And that sort of sounds corny, but it's true, and it's what makes the project so much fun. So, if you're on the fence about getting into a vintage motorcycle project, you already know my answer. You should absolutely do it. I had literally not ridden a bike when I bought this one, and I've had an absolute blast. All the mechanics are simple enough that you learn a lot and you get it done almost entirely on your own. The resources online are incredibly helpful. Again, go with those manuals and OEM parts first. And the community that you immediately become a part of is just so friendly and really consistently fun to hang out and talk with. So go ahead and buy that vintage bike. I'm probably gonna go buy a second one myself in a minute. And thanks for watching.